Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We're here for an allowable ex parte briefing. Before we get started, please join me in a brief moment of silence. Thank you very much. We're going to call roll. Present in the hearing room, we have commissioners representing districts 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioner Irving. Attorney Moser, if you would please read the docket.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, commissioners, and to all who are present here today, either in person or virtually. Today is Monday, March the 28th, 2022. And we are here in the Commission's hearing room pursuant to a notice of request for an allowable ex parte briefing from Charter Communications Incorporated. The subject matter notice to be discussed today relates to Charter Communications, Inc. as a business here in South Carolina and nationally. This, I would remind everyone, is a briefing and not a hearing. The briefing must be conducted in compliance with the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260C, and the requirements of that statute are, in part, that the allowable ex parte briefing be confined to the subject matter which has been noticed. Charter Communications, Inc. shall present information to the Commission at this allowable ex parte on the following items. First, Charter's business profile and its impact, both nationally and in South Carolina. Second, its challenges, opportunities, and solutions to reducing the digital divide and timely deploying broadband services where they are needed most. Third, Charter's commitment, progress, and ideas toward the timely deployment of broadband services in South Carolina. I would therefore ask the presenters, the commissioners, and staff to please refrain from discussing any matters not related to the specific topics. The statute prohibits any presenter, commissioners, or commission staff from requesting or giving any commitment, predetermination, or prediction regarding any action by any commissioner as to an ultimate issue which either is or is likely to come before the commission. I would also ask the presenters, the staff, and the commissioners to refrain from referencing any report, article, statute, or document of any kind that are not included in today's presentation. A copy of any document which is referred to during the briefing must be provided to the Office of Regulatory Staff for inclusion into the record, which will be certified by the Chief Clerk of the Commission, Ms. Jocelyn Boyd. If anyone during the course of this briefing exceeds the scope or does not comply with or fails to conduct themselves within the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260 governing allowable allowable ex parte briefings, it is expected that a contemporaneous objection will be made. And finally, everyone in attendance today, either in person or virtually, must sign in or register. Everyone in the hearing room or watching virtually must read, sign, and return the form which you were given at the door or the form which will be emailed to you for your virtual appearance, which will include instructions and the deadline for its return. It is required by law for each attendee, whether attending virtually or in person, to certify that the requirements contained in Section 58-3-260C have been complied with in this presentation. Thank you all for your time and your attention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Attorney Moser. Office of Regulatory Staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the Commission. My name is Chris Huber, and I'm General Counsel for the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff. And I'm here today as the designee of ORS's Executive Director for the purposes of today's briefing. I have nothing further at this time. Thank you.
All right. Attorney Willoughby.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, members of the Commission. Thank you very much for allowing us to appear before you today. My name, for the record, is Mitchell Willoughby. I'm an attorney here in Columbia, South Carolina, with the law firm of Willoughby and Hafer. With me today is Andrew D'Antoni, an attorney with our firm as well. I will, at this time, Mr. Chairman, introduce our members from Charter that will be presenting, and will allow them to then do the presentation. I'll also be making a part of the presentation. With us today is Marva Johnson, who is Group Vice President for State Government Affairs with Charter. Next to her is Mike Chwanek, who's Vice President, State Regulatory Affairs for Charter. And next to Marva on the other side is Ben Brazil, who is Senior Director, State Government Affairs for South Carolina. And it's all of our pleasure to appear before you today. Mr. Chairman, if this is okay with you and the members of the Commission, when I cover a couple of slides that will be part of the presentation, I'll do so from the bench there, if that's okay with the Commissioner.
That's fine.
Thank you very much. And with that, I think our presentation is ready to be brought up, and then we will turn it over to Marva, who will make our opening remarks and begin the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you all. This is very exciting for us. If you haven't heard, we are really leaning in on the broadband challenge and working as hard as we can to help solve the digital divide. We had an opportunity to spend some time with a few of you at CRUC last year. We shared some data points about some of the challenges as it relates to the digital divide nationally, as well as specifically within South Carolina and our efforts in South Carolina. I got some good reading references, the broadband crash course and Farm Fresh Broadband that I think are going to help us move forward well here. But today we're going to talk about Charter, and we're going to talk a little bit about our national footprint, specifically what we're doing here in the state of South Carolina. We're going to talk about the broadband digital divide. We're going to talk about some solutions to address the challenge here in South Carolina. And then we're going to talk about how we believe we're helping to make sure we're ready to move forward to close that divide as swiftly as possible. Just to keep it interesting, we're going to flip between presenters here. So hopefully it'll make it more interesting and give you a greater selection of thought here. So thanks again. And we're very honored to have the opportunity to share this discussion with you all today.
Good morning. My name is Mike Chwanek, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Pleased to be with you here today. I will touch briefly on, slide disappeared on me? Or there we are. No, the one before that, please. There we are. So to briefly just introduce ourselves at a national level, we have a couple of metrics there that I think give you a sense of who we are as a company nationally, and Ben will touch upon the state-specific metrics in a second. So interesting as you look at those numbers, a couple things that stand out. One is, and this is consistent with kind of how the industry's trended, over the last decade, we are very much a broadband company, right? I think folks look at us as, a cable company, but if you look at those metrics, literally we have twice as many broadband customers today relative to what we provide in terms of video service. So not a surprise, but it is a pretty startling metric if you look at how this industry has evolved over the last few years. The other thing that stands out there, and for those of you who may be in our service area here in South Carolina, we are very much a growing mobile company. That number, as we approach 3 million customers, is pretty remarkable in a relatively short period of time. And I think what's happening there is it's a blend of us offering very attractive mobile offerings We're competing on price, right? We're giving folks another option on wireless, and it presents us with an interesting business opportunity because we're leveraging Verizon's network, where we have a business relationship with them, and what we have as our own infrastructure. So it's really positioned us very effectively in the wireless space. And I think as you look at larger issues here in South Carolina, the state and we as a company have an opportunity to support you and for you to derive benefits from the fact that we can bring economies of the scale. We're well capitalized, and we're constantly innovating and making the investments we need to deliver new products and services to your state.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Ben Brazil. I'm the local Senior Director here in South Carolina for Charter. And I have the opportunity to describe to you a little bit more about our profile in the state. We are large nationally, as Mike talked about, but the interesting thing about Charter and the cable company in South Carolina in general is that we started through small entrepreneurs back in the 70s. So we are in a lot of small communities already. Obviously, the point of today's topic is rural broadband. We are already in a lot of small towns, Quinby, Lane, Coward, Cowpens, all across the state, because it started with small rural communities that couldn't get cable television. Obviously, now we're a broadband company, and we are going to be making extensive growth into much more rural areas, much more lower density areas than we are now. But even though we are a large economy of scale company, our roots actually start very rural. We have 954,000 customers served in South Carolina. We have 3,165 employees as of December 31st of 2021. And you may have seen in the news last week, we just announced 350 new jobs in our West Columbia location. So that number will be 3,500 employees by the end of the year. We're growing to service all the broadband growth. We pay $110 million in taxes and fees last year, and we made $243 million in capital investment in South Carolina. So again, our focus now is expanding broadband access across South Carolina. You see our existing footprint in the slide in the dark blue. We'll go into this a little bit more in the presentation, but our job is to move into the more lower density areas. But we have a great basis of coverage in South Carolina today to help solve this problem. Thank you.
And as we look at the things that we're working on as a company, over the last few years, we've gotten a variety of different awards for things we've been working on in terms of investment and deployment. But I think it's this one, recently that I think stands out, in our mind as something we would bring to your attention. And I think it reflects the fact that rural broadband deployment, as Ben said, is very much in our DNA. For those of us who started at Legacy Charter, and I was there a few years before the merger, I was visiting small towns in that case, around the Northeast U.S., New York, Massachusetts, and other states, and we were talking to them about partnerships, and we were talking to them about build-out. And this was 5 or 6 years ago, right? So while this may be very much a pressing issue at this moment in time, it's something where we've got a long-standing history, and I think have demonstrated a long-standing commitment to work in this space, and I think that's reflected by the fact that we're being recognized on that basis.
That positions us well to go into a more in-depth conversation about South Carolina and the digital divide here. So as both Mike and Ben mentioned, we are committed to serving rural America. About 30% of our existing network is already in rural locations. And as we talked about, even our build outs here in South Carolina for 2021 alone, we extended our plan to 44,000 unserved locations here in the state of South Carolina. All of those locations were not rural locations, but we're constantly making an investment in trying to reach more homes and more businesses to extend service places where there was not service before. And when we looked at if you look at the FCC's most recent reports, the FCC's broadband deployment report, which was released earlier this year, or earlier in 2021, estimated that there's 14.5 million Americans who don't have access to broadband service 25/3. Right here in South Carolina, that's about 451,000 South Carolinians who do not have access to 25/3 speed, and that's again based on the Federal Communications Commission's broadband deployment report statistics.
And on this slide, we're referencing a report that you have access to, and we're happy to answer questions about. But I think the takeaways here are really, I think, what all of you know intuitively, right? Which is there is a real economic cost to delays in broadband deployment. I mean, it obviously impacts people's lives in a very real way. For those of us who have school-age children in particular, what they need to do and what we need to do as parents, right, in terms of managing their education, is really something that you can't take for granted. And as I often say, if I wasn't emailing with a teacher or annoying my kids by monitoring their grades, right, which I know their grades before they do, how would one, manage their education, right? It kind of, we take it for granted, right? And this, I think, tags, for your benefit, the real economic cost of delay, right? It's an economic cost to those people who are directly impacted, those families, those businesses, but also to society in general, right? We're not benefiting from them being connected, and that's costing all of us and costing the state of South Carolina. And, we're honored by the fact that, the federal government, and we're going to touch on other investments today, the federal government stepped up, with RDOF, which is the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, and South Carolina was a large recipient of those funds. We're honored by the fact that we were a major awardee of those funds, and that's something that we're going to be working on in the coming years as we continue to expand our network here in the state.
And we've talked a bit about network expansion, and we'll go through that in more details and talk about our investment and continued build out here in South Carolina. But we understand that it's not about access for every family. For many families, it's actually about affordability. And so as we look to do our part in extending service to all families, we're very pleased to be a part of the Affordable Connectivity Program. And what it actually gives us an opportunity to do is to merge two programs. We've, for years, had our Spectrum Internet Assist program, which provides service for families who are free and reduced lunch eligible, also for elderly individuals who are SSI eligible. And that service we priced in the marketplace at $17.99 a month. And that allowed these families to have access to 30 meg service. What we're now adding to that affordability platform and portfolio for our customers in all markets, not just select markets. So as we extend our service into rural areas and as we build out our RDOF locations, not only will those residents be have access to our ETC services for telephone service. They'll also have access to our Spectrum Internet Assist program, as well as the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is the new program that the Federal Communications Commission has transitioned to. The wonderful thing about the Affordable Connectivity Program, affectionately known as ACP, is that allows the consumer to choose the service that works for their family. So it's not a preset package or speed. Those families get a preset $30 credit, so that if you'd like to have a higher speed tier for your family, you can make that choice you still get the $30 credit. It also allows these families to have multiple options to have access to the program. So in other words, if you're eligible for our Spectrum Internet Assist program, then you're also going to be eligible for the ACP program. It extends the program to families who are eligible under SNAP, some of the other tribal programs that give you access to broadband discounts. So it gives us a much broader range of customers who will also now be eligible for the $30 credit under ACP.
Excuse me,
Yes.
Chairman, if I might. And I don't know who would or could answer. We've talked about rural areas, rural locations, and digital divide, and I've heard that a lot. Not here, but I mean just a lot in the last few months and everything else. And I've never really heard anyone kind of define exactly what that is, and what does that mean? I guess it's been mentioned, like rural locations and rural areas. I mean, I grew up in the country in Chester. You can't get much more rural than that. But I don't know what else that includes. And like this digital divide, I think I know, but.
Commissioner Caston, I love that you asked that question. I gave a similar presentation to an economic group a couple of months ago in Florida, and that was we actually had a slide on that because it varies in terms of actual definitions, but the broadly accepted expectation of what you're referencing when you're referring to the digital divide, it includes a couple of components. The first component is, of course, whether you have access. And so a lot of what we're solving for through these broadband grant programs is making sure that individuals have access to broadband. And the Federal Communications Commission has defined broadband as a service that is 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. Now, many of you who are enjoying internet service at home would probably question whether that's the right speed. And if you look to some of the more recent guidance and some of the more recent investment commitments through some of the one-time funds coming from the federal government, and even for our state grant program here in South Carolina, I think that we're looking more towards speeds that are 100 megabits per second download and 10 megabits per second upload in order to ensure the full access to services like telehealth or full access to opportunities to run a business. So we first have the access portion of the digital divide. The second component of the digital divide is affordability. Just because you can bring it to my home doesn't mean I can really access it and I can really enjoy the service. And so when we talked about our Spectrum Internet Assist program and the Affordable Connectivity Program through the Federal Communications Commission, those types of programs help solve for the affordability component of the digital divide. And in many ways, the affordability component is actually larger than the access component, but both portions of the challenge need to be solved for. And then lastly, the third component of the digital divide that we're also trying to help solve for is digital literacy. So we have, people who have access, who have solutions for affordability, but maybe cannot understand or don't have the educational background or the tools or the training in order to make the most out of that connectivity. As much as we believe that everybody wants our gigabit service and it's all about our gigabit service, it's really not about that. It's really about access to education, access to healthcare. So this digital literacy component is a component where we work with third parties or third-party organizations on their own, try to reach into communities and find these individuals who may not understand the full scope of what the value of the connectivity services can bring for them and their families. And so they do digital literacy training. Some of them also offer connected devices so that these families have access to tools to allow them to connect to the internet and to use that access in a way that's meaningful and productive for their families. So when we talk about the digital divide, we're talking about all three of those challenges and how they, collectively leave people disenfranchised. And thank you for that question, Commissioner, because it is it is a presumptive situation that we made in putting the slides together, and I'm glad you gave us a chance to share that.
Well, and when I mentioned rural or rural areas, I believe I was reared in one, but I didn't know it at the time. But being a Clemson man and coming to Columbia, Clemson's considered rural to a lot of USC folks, so I'm not real sure whether we are or not, but just kind of trying to better understand what that is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My family's from Blakely, Georgia, Early County. So believe me, I know about living in rural areas. And another interesting perspective when we are looking at access concerns, more than 20% of the people who don't have access are in rural areas. And it varies by state and that number grows. But we also have some people who are in pockets in areas that are not rural, but are in suburbs that aren't really heavily densely populated. So when we speak a lot, we speak to both terms. We use both the term rural and the term unserved. The term unserved is a term we use more broadly, regardless of whether you're specifically in a geographically rural area or in maybe just an area that's just not densely populated, but is not specifically rural. But we use unserved to mean anybody, wherever you are, that doesn't have access to 25.3.
And Marv, I can add to Commissioner Caston's comments and relate to them because, Commissioner, I grew up down a dirt road in rural Horry County, so I know exactly what you speak. I'm very familiar with Chester County too, and so when you're down a dirt road and you're one of a few families living down there, then obviously the density of population means that you're going to be the last to get a telecommunication service, plain old telephone service. I remember having a party line, so those sorts of things exist, and you deal with it in every area of utilities that you regulate. Water and sewer, if you're the last person on the line, extending that line gets to be very expensive. But what has happened today is everybody realizes that broadband is absolutely not a luxury, but is essential to people being able to compete. That person growing up in Chester County or Horry County or wherever they may be in every nook and cranny of this state, the state and the federal government has decided that those folks need those equal opportunities to those resources. And that's what bridging that digital divide is all about.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for your question, Commissioner. And just to speak a little bit more about our efforts to bridge the digital divide, I think we wanted to talk about how we support adoption-related initiatives. And I'm sorry.
I grew up in Clio, so maybe I'm backing up, and maybe it's something you're going to get to. But I think Mr. Chowan mentioned infrastructure, and I'm very curious. Some things I've read somewhere, or just some thoughts I've had about with the highway construction. Is this something that you'll be able to run along with, or will there be buried lines, or what sort of plans those are?
I'm going to get into that in
Okay.
a couple slides.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. He's even going to talk about Florence County, maybe one you care about.
Marlboro.
Excellent question.
Yeah.
Perfectly in for
Thank
Fantastic. And so coming to bring this back to the adoption initiatives, we've got, in addition to our Spectrum Internet Assist program, we've also got a program called the Spectrum Digital Education Grants, and that program is really designed to help with the digital literacy component. As a part of a 5-year commitment to help with the digital literacy concerns, Charter has spent over invested over $7 million in these programs, and we've awarded 1 million digital education grants to 49 nonprofits across the country. Right here in South Carolina, we've invested $35,000 in a partnership with the Palmetto Care Connections to advance digital literacy goals, and $12,000 in the communities in schools in South Carolina, again, to advance digital literacy goals. And then one program we're very excited about, and this will be an important component as we move forward with some of our more rural bills, is our Spectrum Community Assist. This is a new program that was launched at the end of last year, and with our Spectrum Community Assist program, we'll be helping communities that may be underserved in terms of opportunity as we extend broadband in these areas, or with our existing broadband networks in these areas. We're going to be working with a community center in these designated locations. We'll be doing some job skills training. We'll be making physical improvements to the community center itself. We'll be maintaining broadband connectivity for those facilities, and then we'll also make in-kind contributions. And the expectation is that through these programs and through these partnerships, not only will we extend digital literacy, we will also extend the true value of this connectivity. We will help people get jobs. We will help people change their economic situation. We'll help improve some of the educational outcomes in these areas. And so we're looking to choose 100 communities across the country for the next 3 to 5 years as we look to deploy this. And then there'll also be a number of communities that we may add in as we look to work on some projects like we had talked about doing for Saluda County here in South Carolina. So that's a program that we're going to be leaning in on in 2022 and forward.
So Commissioner Powers, this is the slide that I was referring to, and this is kind of an overview of where we are in South Carolina in terms of closing the digital divide. When Marva talked about the 3 aspects of the digital divide, Commissioner Caston, it was basically access, which is the infrastructure piece, affordability, which is the other A, and then adoption, which is kind of the digital literacy. This piece is the access piece, the infrastructure piece, Commissioner Powers, that you were asking about. We actually were the recipient of a large federal grant to move into much lower density areas or rural areas last year, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. And it was $112 million of FCC subsidy money for us to move into thousands of rural census blocks in South Carolina. It's a multi-year project. The way that the South Carolina slide is presented to you today, it shows you in dark blue our existing network, and then in the green it shows the census blocks that are wholly unserved that we committed to build to with the federal subsidy. And the bigger portion of that was actually a private investment from Charter. The federal subsidy was the smaller piece. Our investment from Charter is the much larger piece on those. But when it comes to actually getting there, which I think was the heart of your question, you can really only get fiber to a home one of 2 ways. We're not doing it through the air. We're not doing it wirelessly, which is another option, or through a satellite. We're actually delivering a fiber optic cable, which is the gold standard of delivering broadband because it provides gigabit service to homes, which is future-proof. It's a 30-year technology. It's not something that's going to be overrun. We want to get that fiber there. You can do it underground through the existing rights-of-way, like the highway transportation system in some cases. You can bury it underground, or you can connect to the existing infrastructure of utility poles. Utility poles were put in place for, of course, the telecommunications system, but that's where we can quickly and rapidly deploy our fiber optics on a very fast basis, it's the faster way to go than having to dig through rock and dig through gas lines and everything else. So those are the two ways. But when you talk about the highway system, most of those utility poles run along the highways, of course. And as you expand roads, probably our utility owners are going to expand the utility pole system as well. So in terms of the current network, we are actually in a multi-year basis going to be going to, again, to reinforce the green, these wholly unserved census blocks over a multi-year project with the subsidy we have from the federal government. So we look forward to doing that, and we'll expand a little bit more on the next slide in terms of how we're planning on doing that.
Great. As we have a historical opportunity that we didn't anticipate even when we won the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund reverse auction over a year ago. We now are looking on top of the investment that the Federal Communications Commission has committed in extending broadband to wholly unserved census blocks. There's now tens of billions of dollars available that many of our states are also using to further extend broadband to unserved areas. And so for the state of South Carolina, not that all of this money is necessarily being allocated for broadband, some portion of it will be, and we're using these numbers to demonstrate sort of what the universe of potential is. For South Carolina, that's nearly $2.5 million worth of the ARPA money, the American Rescue Plan money that's available here. And then another $1 billion was given to the counties directly under the American Rescue Plan. And then some of the municipalities also received funding that totals about $191 million in funding. All of these funds, not specifically for broadband deployment, but still funds that are available, some portion of which could be used to service broadband. And I was introduced earlier as the group vice president for the Southeast region. So when I look across the region, my 9-state region starts with Maryland, and it's basically the Southeast, the 9 states that make up the Southeast. That's that's over $37 billion in federal funding at the state level, and another $15 billion at the local or county level, and then another $5 billion in the local municipalities' hands. So we really do have a historical opportunity to take some of these funds and use them in a way that extends that full broadband access and connectivity to every citizen in South Carolina.
Ms. Johnson, if I may, if you could go back to that slide, the money slide, if you will. Is there any way for you to give us a picture, paint a picture of what we should expect to see in a few years in terms of broadband in rural areas or underserved areas across the state based on all the money that's available? Because I've been hearing about all the money that's available for broadband, and so I'm just curious to know, what should I expect to see in 3 to 5 years after this money has been used to increase access to broadband?
All right. I can certainly share with you from Charter's perspective what we think the opportunity is, and we have a slide a little bit later that talks specifically about some of the funds we believe may be allocated in South Carolina, and it's about $400 million that we're looking at right now. There are estimates that say that it might take as much as $2 billion to build out full access to all of the remaining homes. However, for Charter's perspective, what it would look like at the end of 5 to 6 years is really full access. Like, you have utility access for your electric service at most locations. The expectation is not by one single technology, but by a combination of technologies. Every address should be serviceable. So as we think about extending fiber, and as Ben mentioned, fiber is the gold standard because it is going to give you some, not just resiliency in terms of the quality of the service, but we are also looking at a network that's going to be pretty much future-proof. But the truth is fiber is not going to be able to get to every location. So the fact that SpaceX is also extending their network through satellite should, when you combine satellite internet service, fixed wireless service, and wired fiber to the home networks, we really should have ubiquitous access within the next 5 to 6 years for South Carolina. That's Charter's perspective, but we can certainly talk a little bit more about what that investment would have to look like for that math to come true.
Thank you.
If I may, I wanted to make sure I understood that too. You were saying fiber optic, I think Mr. Brazil said, was the gold standard. And you just said satellite, potentially satellite, which kind of sounds like a satellite phone to me, Did you say anything about like cellular tower or like a 5G or any? I may have missed that, or maybe you did or didn't. I wasn't sure.
You didn't miss it. I actually, it's been noted earlier, and as Mike noted, we're actually working to provide wireless service even ourselves, and we do partner with Verizon on our MVNO at this point in our network evolution. But Charter, as a cable operator, as a broadband service provider, is also extending 5G network technology as well. But and we have a strong appreciation for the value of that wireless technology, and we do believe it's essential to our ability to best serve our customers. However, the truth is that wireless service has to come back for backhaul to a wired network. So as we make investments, we believe that our wireless network will be strong because of the wired fiber network that's going to be backhauling that traffic and enabling those wireless speeds.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that it would be not just one thing, but to I guess fully cover the state would require multiple forms, whether that's satellite, whether that's fiber optic, whether that is cellular, and I'm assuming when you said that back feed or whatever, that
Backhaul,
yeah, that just goes back to somewhere where you got fiber optic or whatever.
exactly.
And Commissioner, if I may, I think your perspective on this is absolutely right. It's going to ultimately, we're here before you as obviously a major service provider and a major investor in the state. But there will be others, right? And those others will in fact do deployment that looks similar to ours in terms of wireline deployment. But as you suggested, the circumstances in these areas particularly can be challenging, right? The economics and the circumstances in terms of where you may have other utility network to piggyback off of, right, create obstacles. And so the satellite component and the wireless component, generally provided by others, is going to have to be part of the solution, right? Because you're not going to get there exclusively on the basis of wireline service, because the math would potentially be cost prohibitive. And in some cases, the infrastructure isn't set up in such a way that you could extend wireline to certain areas, even if you wanted to pay almost any price.
Mm-hmm.
Chairman Williams, I'd like to piggyback on your question. Ms. Johnson, when you talked about the 5 to 6 year window, was that for Charter's investment, or was that related to those other providers that won RDOF monies as well?
This is really just Marva's best guess, because at the end of the day, it really depends on how fast we can go, and that is dependent upon how much incremental investment the state is willing to make, the federal government's putting in, and then how much additional private sector capital will come to bear. If you look at the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, the service providers that were awarded the locations to build out in that reverse auction have 6 years to build to these areas that are wholly unserved, census blocks with no service. Ben will talk a little later about some of the things that we're doing in order to make sure that as we build and anchor our networks in these areas that are wholly unserved, we optimize the investment we've made to try to add more locations to these builds. And we'll talk about Florence County, how we're working with some of the local leaders to say, we're going to be building in this area. We'd like to extend service throughout your county as fast as we can get there. We could either partner with the county themselves or work with the state through the state grant program so that we can try to get as close to universal access or full access in each of these counties as we can, as fast as we can. But a lot of it is going to be dependent on the tolerance for investment, and as Mr. Chwanek noted, how quickly we can extend the plant. As Ben noted earlier, the fastest way for us to get our network using the technology that Charter uses in our network topography is to attach to utility poles and to run our service aerially. If we have good, easy access to utility poles, the faster we can go. Going underground is great. It's a great solution. We can't always go underground. It's not a solution that works in every scenario, but it takes longer. So it really is contingent upon how much we're willing to invest and continue to invest to lean in on the problem.
Ms. Johnson, I didn't mean to turn your seat into the hot seat. So this question is for the entire panel or for you if you want it. I understand there's 6 years for the build out. Is there options to walk away since this is sort of new and some of the companies are going into unserved areas or areas with no access, unserved as opposed to underserved? What if a company finds that this was a whole lot harder than we thought it would be? What happens then if they decide that they don't want to pursue that course of action anymore?
Yeah, I'm going to take the hot seat, but I'll share it with Mr. Chwanek. The best time for a company to walk away from a Rural Digital Opportunity Fund commitment would have been is actually before your long form is approved. So one of the things that we had to do after winning the awards was submit a long form, which it has much more substantial information about our plans to build out. And there were penalties that you would suffer before your long form is approved, but after your long form is approved, those penalties escalate. So you could end up paying back any money you receive plus a penalty of up to like 85% of what the award was. So could a company walk away? Probably. Would it be financially advised? It probably wouldn't be. I'm sure it would depend on the situation. For Charter, we are looking at this as a commitment we plan to fulfill. And we tried to make sure that when we got to the point where our long form was being considered, we are ready to execute on the remaining obligations.
The only thing, and everything Marva said is true, the only thing I would add, to that is we filed a couple of supplemental filings with your agency over the last few months because we did a more careful review of our RDOF commitments, and there were certain areas where, based on just a snapshot in time, the FCC, let's say, was identifying buildings that didn't exist, right? Or they were identifying areas as unserved that were in fact served, right? So we took that list very seriously, and we scrubbed it with the understanding, as Marva said, that this was a real commitment. And from your perspective, and I've been there at one point in my life, on the public sector side, the penalties are real and they are intentionally severe, right? Because the expectation was that when you as a service provider commit to this, that you're honoring that commitment, right? So I would dare I say, they're punitive is, I guess, and I think rightfully so, right? The expectation should be that if a company, made the commitment and potentially others were eligible, right, to make the commitment and were not awarded the funds, that, that we and others will honor that commitment.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, but I do appreciate the questions, and I meant to say it at the opening. We'd love to have questions throughout the presentation, but I don't have to say that to you all, so thank you.
So that brings right into the segue goes into what has South Carolina General Assembly done to promote a broadband distribution throughout the state to bridge the digital divide. And about a year and a half ago, as you are aware, the General Assembly, and it was immediately signed by the governor, passed South Carolina's Broadband Accessibility Act of 2020. I'll refer to it as the BBA from time to time. And on this slide you have in front of you now, in the lower left-hand corner is a quote from Governor McMaster, and I think it sums up the public policy of the state. A broadband connectivity is a powerful catalyst for economic and social advancement. It is no longer a luxury. It is a necessity critical to ensuring a level playing field for those in rural areas. So the goal is to someone growing up in Chester, in a rural area, or Horry County or Clio, in rural areas, that they will have equal access to a broadband infrastructure as those folks growing up in Columbia, Lexington, Spartanburg, Greenville, Charleston, some of the more populated centers of the state that really have high-speed internet access available to them. The legislative objectives are on the left-hand side. I think it's important to note that the General Assembly denoted as its objectives to promote the efficient deployment of broadband throughout the state. And then the BA continues to go on and says that one of our objectives is facilitating access to broadband services in unserved areas. And that is the focus, Chairman Williams, without any question. That's what the General Assembly's objectives were. And so it's always means and methods. So what is the methods by which the General Assembly says we're going to try to accomplish this, or we're going to incentivize service providers to be able to do it? You've heard others say here this morning about the gold standard is the connectivity of being able to use a fiber optic cable to the reason fiber optic, it's been around for a little while, but fiber optic are glass leads inside the cables, and these have the capacity to transmit great amounts of data. And we're in a data-driven world at this point. Businesses are constantly capturing data. You hear all kinds of information dealing with the ability to transmit data. So that's what you need to do, is be able to fiber optic cable, and even if you have a wireless connection at some point, you're going to come back to backhaul. You're going to have fiber optic connection in this day and age is going to be a great part of that distribution of those communication signals. So how are we going to do it? We can't just go out and start laying wire in the middle of a roadway. Obviously, you got to coordinate with government officials to do that. And you can't get to the young man in Chester that might be on the end of a line because he's not on an interstate highway and could be still down a dirt road at this point in time. Hopefully not. At least that road grew up on has been paved. At some point in time, they waited until after I left, Commissioner, before they paved it. But it's my 93-year-old mom still lives down that road, and she's glad to have that road paved today, and I'm glad for her. So what are we going to do, and what are the needs? Well, we need non-discriminatory access to the existing rights-of-way. The General Assembly made the determination that these rights-of-way have been developed in many cases with federal supporting funds, low-cost loans, any number of ways. Could be aerial. In most of the cases, it will be aerial. And as you heard Marva talk about, aerial is less expensive. It's more widely available. And yes, you can put it underground. It costs more, takes longer, but that's an option. But not, it's going to delay the implementation and distribution if you're underground, and it's going to be more expensive if that's the way. So you got to have non-discriminatory access to existing poles and rights-of-way. Got to have the rights-of-way. You can't just start laying cable across someone's private property. Just and reasonable rates, terms, and conditions. To be able to do that, what are you going to have to pay for the right to attach to existing pole owners' rights-of-way and their existing poles? So that's got to be just and reasonable rates. And obviously, the Public Service Commission has been involved with developing rates and approving rates and terms and conditions, and you're given responsibilities in connection with the Broadband Accessibility Act in that regard as well if there's a dispute about those. How quickly can you do it? What sort of timelines? Can people intentionally try to delay the distribution for one reason or another? The General Assembly adopted the SEC make-ready timelines and requirements. They did that by incorporating by reference Commissioner Williams, Vice Chair Belser, Mr. Powers. They incorporated by reference FCC regulations that set out those timelines. Those timelines have been widely used for a period of time. They've been approved. They're uniform. They're widely known. So we want to get distribution done quickly. So we're going to adopt these make-ready timelines. And make-ready is a major part of the issue. So you approach a pole owner and say, I need to attach to your poles that exist there today. And obviously the pole owner has obligations and requirements, and they want to make sure that the attachments are being able to be done in a safe way, that there's capacity on those existing lines. Sometimes there's insufficient capacity, and your make-ready refers to being able to say, I will make these poles ready to receive my additional attachment. And the terms and conditions of that will be important things that can either delay or facilitate the speed at which it will be moved forward. Uniform pole standards. Everybody's focused on the General Assembly adopted as a reasonable standard the National Electric Safety Code. And so there'll be questions if you comply with standards of the National Electric Safety Code. Is that good enough? And there'll be perhaps varying points of view on that, but we believe that the National Electric Safety Code is the standard. And then your involvement in that process, if agreements can't be reached in the field where direct negotiations are ongoing or should occur, then if there are disputes for access, then this commission has the power to resolve those disputes. And I'll give you just a little more detail. So Marva, if we'll go to this next slide.
May
Mr.
I
Chair.
stop you just 1 second,
Sure.
if I may, Chair? The pole, the rapid pole attachment, which I think I understand that, you can do it quicker. Thing with water and wastewater, we didn't have a choice. Although we did find some of the fiber optic cables, pretty expensive to fix those. That said, I know through the course of time, there's been debate back and forth about overhead, whether it's communication, electric lines, should they be underground? Some folks say, well, they're ugly, we ought to put them underground. Others say, well, storms, they're going to be knocked out. It's better to do that. Is that any consideration in this process?
Well, I would think that all of those things are worthy of consideration, Commissioner, without any question. Like with everything, time is critical. The faster you can make the distribution of the new infrastructure, the better. Cost, regardless of the fact that the federal government and states, to some degree, have devoted funds for the purpose of improving broadband infrastructure, distributing fiber optics. Nevertheless, the supply of money, I've always found in my life that it's always limited. So funds are limited as well. So the question becomes, how much would it cost to go underground versus using existing right-of-way to attach it to existing poles? And do you have the funds to make the choice? But those things will certainly be considered, and you might have multiple applications. You might have applications where it runs above ground and on poles for some part of a right-of-way and then runs underground through other parts of the rights-of-way. But obviously that deployment in the field will be something that the engineers will look at very carefully as to what is the most prudent and safe installation method that may be available, given the right-of-way and the limitations that might exist there.
And Mitch, Commissioner, I can weigh in as well. I hope I'm not redundant, but your question is a perfect one. The issues that you all have to weigh when it comes to broadband deployment into rural areas are issues of safety in hurricanes, which is much better underground, obviously. Issues of beautification, which is the unsightliness in neighborhoods. The rule that we've heard from the legislature and from the Office of Regulatory Staff as well, the broadband office, is speed is the number one consideration that we heard from the legislature. And that's because of the great cost of a 6-year-old not having broadband for an additional year. But by far, underground is a great way to go. It takes longer to do that because of obvious reasons, based on your experience as well, obviously.
Commissioner Powers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Willoughby, obviously you looked at this closer than I have at this point. You start talking about pole disputes. I'm assuming that's something that our hearing officers can decide, or is that something that would be good for mediation or arbitration, or how do you see that playing out?
Well, all of those mechanisms, in fact, if we'll go to the second slide that we have up here, yes, right here. All of those mechanisms are available, Commissioner Powers. There are two methods: rapid pole attachment, dispute resolution. So the Act provides two methods for dispute resolution within it. And one method is to come directly to the commission. If you've negotiated with a party, you have to notify an owner of poles that we need access to your poles, and you send a writing to them saying, I want access to your poles, then you have to negotiate with them for a period of time. But if you reach an impasse where you're unable to agree to a contract, then you're able to come to the commission, and they're they're statutory deadlines by which the commission must receive the petition to resolve the dispute and hear that dispute, go through the discovery process and have a hearing. And a hearing officer might be able to do some of the normal things that a hearing officer does, dealing with discovery issues and the like, but ultimately the dispute resolution lies with the commission, and so the commission would have to hear the case and make a ruling and issue an order within the statutory deadlines. There's also a mechanism whereby You can go to ORS, or you can submit an issue to ORS, and ORS can attempt to mediate that to any disputes, and there's a process to go through that. But at the end of that day, if the mediation still leaves the parties with differing points of view and they're unable to resolve their issues, then the commission ultimately is the one that you come to resolve the dispute. So there are two avenues. One comes directly to the commission. One employs the mediation services and capabilities, and ORS does some other things in that process that's defined by the statute as well. So the General Assembly made it clear, as I pointed out earlier, that they want one of the things is efficient, and they want it to get to unserved areas as quick as possible. And I might say to Commissioner Caston, my 93-year-old mother that lives still down that same road that I grew up on, if her children were still living with her, and of course they're not, but if they were still living with her, she would want those services for their educational benefits, as every mother in those communities want, as quickly as they can get it. And of course, I live in a community in Northeast Columbia, and all of the utilities are underground, and they have been for years. And that's nice. You don't have the aerial appearance, but out where my mother lives in that rural area, all of those utilities are above ground. So it's a different set of circumstances, and do keep in mind the focus has been to let's get service to those unserved areas that do not have the capability and service available to them today. And as Marva pointed out, there are pockets, even within our more urban areas, that have that are part of the digital divide, and they need service as well. But the key here today, in what the General Assembly dealt with, is trying to make sure that the unserved areas are quickly served. As the governor said, it is no longer, it's not a luxury, it's a necessity to ensure a level playing field for those in rural areas. The goal is to have every child, every person that needs telemedicine, educational opportunities, business opportunities, that we are able to develop every nook and cranny of the great state that we all love and serve. And that's one of the goals that the General Assembly had for broadband deployment. And I'll go back to this slide very quickly, and we'll conclude. Uniform standards, National Electric Safety Code, not a hodgepodge where someone has a standard over here and another standard over here. National Electric Safety Code. A lot of these pole owners are electric providers, so they wanted to make sure that there was safety, that make-ready standards were there, and then the FCC timelines were the goals of being able to, let's do it quick, and here's the tool we're going to use that's already available to us. Let's adopt those tools in terms of timelines and move forward with that. And as you see on this slide, the Act is designed with efficiency and rapidity of broadband deployment in mind. That is the goal underpinning this Act. Right. Turn it back to Marva.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you again, Commissioner Caston, for that question, because, and I just wanted to underscore a point that both Ben and Mr. Willoughby made. And when we look at going underground, it is not just, more expensive, but most importantly, if our goal is to be efficient and get out rapidly, it takes more time. And so as we look to deploy our network, we're doing both. We're going aerial, we're going underground, but we're trying to get service out as fast as possible is really what is underscoring our efforts. And so as we also think about the efficiency portion of it, if it costs more to actually go in and entrench, and you can't actually go underground everywhere. The geography has, some limitations. We run into problems with railroad crossings and other things like that. But just assuming the geography is conducive to undergrounding, if it costs more and we're looking at how do we get service out, do we finish in 5 years? Do we finish in 7 years? Do we finish in 10 years with our goal of having service to everyone? There's a finite amount of money. So how fast can we build is number one. And then how far can we stretch the money is number two. And when we look at this slide, which is our assessment, or really it's really a comparison of what investments are being made across my region, which is the Southeast region. South Carolina is very well positioned. On top of the CARES Act projects and other investments the state has made in deploying broadband, I think we're looking now at the opportunity perhaps for as much as $400 million to be invested to get to the remaining 450,000 locations. You can see how that investment compares to what some of the other states are investing. We, of course, know the math that 400 million is not going to get us all 450,000 served, but it's going to make good progress. And if you looked at some of the investments on top of these efforts, including the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, then we start to put together a package that allows for this capital to go as far as we possibly can and reach as many homes as possible.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. So I assume since we're talking rural that you're going to be dealing with a lot of the electric co-ops and relationships with the co-ops in order to be able to get these pole attachments. So I would assume that what you're trying to do is come up with an agreement, kind of a high-level agreement with the co-op for their entire area, and it's not like neighborhood by neighborhood or something like that. And so I guess I'm just wondering, how is that going? I don't remember how many co-ops there are in South Carolina. It's a pretty good number, I think, maybe 20 or 25. And are you trying to get an agreement with all of those that may impact your area? And are you having good progress with that? What's going on with that?
Yes, sir, Commissioner. There are 20, and some of them have entered into the broadband business. Some of them have not. So that's two different categories probably of entities that we need to deal with, but it's going well. The areas that we've started deploying service in particular, we have some really good relationships with, in particular, electric co-ops in the PD region, for instance. Those relationships are going really well. I sat down personally with two of the CEOs in that region, and they were very forthright. They're not in the broadband business there, so that helped because they didn't have any additional business competing, with the poles that they were going to give us access to. So that was very helpful, but those are going really well. I think that Mitch was talking about the National Electric Safety Code standards. I think a universal standard from the Broadband Accessibility Act is extremely helpful. They are following those standards as far as our construction folks in the field are telling us. They're approving pole permits very rapidly, which helps us out a lot, even better than some of the FCC standards that were incorporated into the Act. And obviously, there's a mile of fiber. There's 18 poles in that mile of fiber. Every one of those poles has to have approval from that pole owner for safety purposes to make sure that we get a permit back. If they're processing 25 poles a week, that's a little tough. If they're processing 50 or 75 poles a week, that's better, because we've got to get 10s and 50s and 100 miles of fiber based on our commitment lined up so we can get that bucket truck you saw in the picture and just knock them out. If we have all the permits, we can knock them all out kind of in a row and go miles per day rather than feet per day. So that's an important relationship, but it's the ones that we're working with right now are going well. And there's others that maybe Mike wants to talk about, or Marva, that maybe we don't have the same working relationships now, but we are absolutely working to have that with all of them. I don't know if there's any other.
We can talk about more of it as we go through this.
Okay. I hope that answers your question.
Very good, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate it.
Mr.
Yes, sir.
Chairman,
Commissioner Powers.
and I'll try and hush in a minute. I noticed now that, growing up in Marlboro County, Marlboro-Dillon area, that a lot of, on your map is green for those areas. So I assume when you say the PD co-ops, you're dealing with those co-ops in Marlboro-Dillon up in that area?
Yes, sir. PD Electric and Santee Electric were the two I was referring to that I sat down directly with, and they were very forthright. We had very good meetings, and have no reason to think that we're not going to work great together to get what we have to get done down there.
Years ago, having worked with the development for a rural county, I guess now it goes without saying, if you don't have broadband, you're gonna have a hard time attracting industry and other things with your schools, and of course, telehealth, I think you mentioned as well.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
This next slide is picking up a little bit on your questions there. It goes in it goes into the all of the work that has to go into this, and I kind of covered it when I was answering your question, Commissioner Thomas, but most of the work, even under the best case scenario in an aerial deployment, is not visible to the eye. 70% of the work is actually getting these pole permits approved through a process of deploying the fiber. The last 30% is actually tacking up the fiber and delivering the process to the fiber to the homes. What we do, and when we do a deal and go out and talk to a local government, talk to a local pole owner, is we actually design that project, and then we actually send subcontractors out to walk every single pole line, to walk it out, to put their eyeballs on every structure that we're going to build to, so we know the exact poles that we need to get to, where we need to go underground if there's not pole infrastructure there, or if we can't work out a deal with the pole owner. So all of that walkout and all of that design and all of that pole permitting is by far the hardest work, even under the best case scenario, under an aerial deployment. That's a lot of time that goes into deploying this. But we're doing it, as I talked about. We're meeting with the co-ops, we're meeting with the local governments, and there's two final slides that we'll present to you today. I can go to the next slide just to tell you, in addition to the RDOF that we won, we are trying to synergize on that federal money and do individual deals with counties who also got ARPA money. So the RDOF money covered certain unserved census blocks in multiple counties across South Carolina. What we've done is in 4 counties in particular, we've gone out and talked to many, many counties. In 4 counties in particular, we've shown them the census blocks in their county that will be covered by our investment and the RDOF investment, and asked if they wanted to do a massive design across the county and contribute some of their ARPA funds to cover the areas that we did not get under the RDOF, the low-density areas. These 4 counties we have contracted with to complete the counties out. That is Dillon County, Darlington County, Florence County, and Cherokee County. And in particular, obviously, the relationship with the pole owner was key in some of those counties because we knew it was going to be easy to get permits and go fast. But those 4 counties, we have contracted over the next 2 years to not just do the RDOF, but to leverage the fact that we're already going to have crews in the area to go ahead and finish out other neighborhoods and other low-density areas that are adjacent to the RDOF, so we can finish out the entire county. So we're very proud about that. And we also are planning on participating in the state broadband office. We work very closely with the Office of Regulatory Staff, who now has the state broadband office as of July 1st. We're planning on participating. We participated in their grant programs in the CARES Act, and we're planning on participating in their state grant program, I think that they're anticipating to have later this year. So we're trying to make sure that all of these federal programs work in tandem with each other, so we're not building over top of other folks, and federal money is not fighting other federal money. That's the point of this slide. The last slide is just to show you in particular maybe a little bit of detail on how this works, but what you can see in Florence County, and you can read the information about the deal we have there. The blue areas are where we had RDOF, which was already funded projects on a timeline where Charter was building to these unserved areas with federal subsidy. The red areas are where the county, we did a design with the county and did a walkout, And they were also unserved areas, but we just didn't win those areas in the auction. So the county allowed us to go and do a design for further unserved areas. And we're working with the Office of Regulatory Staff as well with their state mapping office, which they're fantastic. They have great maps there to try and get to the unserved areas of the county. So that's what we call a synergy project. We can leverage the investment that we've made with the RDOF program and layer on top of that other monies that are coming through the ARPA program. With that, I'll conclude my comments. And Marv, if you want to make any final comments, we'll take additional questions.
I mostly want to thank you all for your attention and for the opportunity to share where Charter is going as it relates to our commitment to closing the digital divide. I want to thank you, Chairman Williams, for including us, and Vice Chair and Commissioners for giving us your attention today. Ben's last comment is something that's fairly significant to us. We talk about how long it's going to take, and we talked already about needing to go as fast as possible, and in order to get to as many homes as possible, we had to be efficient with our investment. So it is a concern for us, Chair Williams. You asked about whether we truly have an obligation. What's the risk if we don't build our RDOF locations? We certainly have meaningful substantive penalties. And as we look to continue to extend, not just to build the locations we committed to, but to do them as fast as possible. The law allows 6 years. We don't want to take 6 years. We want to go as fast as possible. We're trying to find ways to make that accelerating that investment make sense. So the way for the state, I think, to be most efficient is to make sure that as we allocate some of these additional funds that are coming forward, we allocate those funds in areas that don't already have money allocated to them. So that it's been noted, we're not fighting federal dollars with state allocated federal dollars, so that everybody's going as fast as we can possibly move to every single location that needs service. So we really appreciate the opportunity. We appreciate the commitment that you all are making and the state of South Carolina is making to make sure that every citizen has service, and we're happy to be a part of it. Any other questions?
Chairman Williams?
Commissioner Williams?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this to us. It's exciting to get to kind of hear this in first person. My first question has to do with the map that you gave us on page 13 of the PowerPoint. And it's, as I read it, the medium blue, it says county currently served by Spectrum Network. Does that mean you cover the entire county, or does that mean you cover a piece
No,
of
ma'am.
it?
The
Okay.
medium blue is probably not the perfect way to show that. It's a graphic that we've used in the past. It means we touch a corner of the county or
Okay.
serve somewhere in the county.
Okay.
And we use it for different purposes, but that is thank you for asking. That could be misconstrued. If it's medium blue, it just means that we have a franchise with the county. We serve some portion of the county. The more important part of that map would be the dark blue,
Right.
which is where our network serves broadband, and of course the green, which is where we've committed to build under the RDOF 904 auction program.
Okay.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm not sure the best way to ask this, but what share of the 450,000 South Carolinians are you likely to cover in the next 6 years? You can change that question around, like if I should have asked by census tract or in some other way.
You mean charter or all of the industry?
Well, if you can answer both, wonderful, but I really am asking about charter.
You have a great resource in South Carolina, the Office of Regulatory Staff, State Broadband Office, who would be able to answer that question, better than I. But I think that the most recent statistics from the Office of Regulatory Staff show 450,000 South Carolinians, but I think it's around 180,000 structures. So houses versus citizens, I guess is what I would say. We have committed under the Charter 904 auction RDOF program, just Charter has stepped up to somewhere around 80 to 90,000 of that 180,000 unserved structures. Now, mapping, of course, is a somewhat of an art. You know, you have to walk out. The ones in Florence, we know because we walked out. We walked every pole line. We looked at every structure. But in general, if those numbers stay in place, Charter has about 50% of the unserved households if all of those numbers are sound. And I would definitely check with Jim Stritzinger at the Office of Broadband to make sure those numbers are right. But that's the rough cut, if that helps.
That's exactly what I was asking. Thank you. My last question is kind of hypothetical, but it's to help me understand the challenges of underground service. And I realize this is unlikely to happen, but if you were moving into an area that already had underground utilities, does that change the cost dramatically?
We actually usually follow the utilities, just as you noted. So
Okay.
if the utilities are already underground, we're going underground.
Okay.
Because we don't actually own the poles. We're always attaching to the utilities infrastructure in that sense. So if they're on poles, we go on the pole. If they're underground, we're happy to go underground as well.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Thanks again for being here. No further questions.
Chairman Williams.
Commissioner Caston.
To build on Commissioner Williams' question, because I just heard numbers like the 450,000 population. That's the estimated population in South Carolina that doesn't have broadband service, correct? And I heard you talk about structures.
Yes, sir.
And I tend to think of that as, you know, a customer. Okay, we had say a meter at a structure, depending on the enumeration district or whatever, it may be 2.8 people per structure. So I guess what I'm trying to determine or get a feel for 450,000 people, and you said that many structures, what population is that? What percentage of that 450,000?
If you do the rough cut of 5 million South Carolina citizens and 450,000 citizens without it, it matches up with the 91% served or 9% unserved by the FCC's calculations. So you did the math perfectly. I'm not a mathematician, obviously you are, but I did the quick math, and I think it matches up with what you were saying. 170 or 80,000 structures equals 450,000 citizens. That's about 2.6 or 2.7 citizens per household. I think that's how the math works, Commissioner, but forgive me if, again, I didn't get an A in math.
I probably didn't either, but I don't recall. All right, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
All right. Any more questions from commissioners? Attorney Moser?
Nothing further.
Office of Regulatory Staff?
Nothing further for ORS. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. I think it's fair to say we enjoyed your presentation. It was very informative, and we appreciate you taking time to come and present to us. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned.
Thank you.